House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling for President Trump to postpone his State of the Union address as we hit day 26 of the government shutdown. In a letter to the president, Pelosi writes, "Sadly, given the security concerns and unless government reopens this week, I suggest that we work together to determine another suitable date after the government has reopened for this address, or for you to consider delivering your State of the Union in writing to the Congress on January 29th. Pelosi points out that in her letter that the Secret Service and Department of Homeland Security tasked with security for the event have actually not been funded. They haven't been funded in 26 days, and she also suggested the president could deliver it in a different format.
This is a housekeeping matter in the Congress of the United States so that we can honor the responsibility of the invitation we extended to the president. You can make it from the Oval Office if you want.
Joining me now, Bob Cusack. He's editor-in-chief of The Hill. So, Bob, do you think that this Nancy Pelosi letter has any impact on actually postponing the State of the Union and the shutdown stalemate?
Yeah, well, I certainly about the address. I think this, in many ways, was a shrewd political move by Nancy Pelosi, citing security. The White House has not responded to it, so obviously they're trying to assess what to do. Now, the State of the Union is required in the Constitution, but how you do it, whether it's in writing, whether it's from the Oval Office, as Nancy Pelosi said, or to Congress, that's up in the air. So there's a lot of options. Some have said, well, maybe Mitch McConnell could invite him to the Senate chamber. But when you're dealing with security issues, this is a high-profile issue, obviously one of the most high-profile issues in Washington, and you've got the cabinet, you've got Supreme Court justices. So I do think this is kind of boxes the White House in. It'll be fascinating to see how they respond, but one way or the other, I mean, the shutdown is not ending, and maybe Nancy Pelosi sees this, Rena, as, well, listen, this is an incentive for him to come to the negotiating table because he's the one who's got to sign the bill into law, and then he can get a speech.
You know, Bob, there's also this bipartisan Senate letter circulating calling for President Trump to actually end the shutdown that's been going on for 3 weeks now. When Senator Lindsey Graham suggested that they reopen the government for a short period of time, the president rejected it. That was earlier this week. Is there a chance, likely, that something will change in the president or the Republicans' calculus on this?
I don't think anytime soon. I mean, the easiest off-ramp politically is for him to declare a national emergency. Now, he has said this week he's not going to do that. The president is prone to change his mind, of course. And certainly some Democrats, they don't love that idea, but they like the idea of reopening the government. So that could reopen the government because then these bills could be signed into law. But he has also said that the shutdown could last for years. So certainly I think this is going to go on. I think unless he declares the emergency for at least another week, if not past the State of the Union. And I don't see the Republican Party bending, at least not yet. Democrats are more united here, and that's why they're staying strong. Republicans are a little more fractured, but they're not widely fractured.
I want to ask you about that unity, Democratic unity. You know, the president on Tuesday had actually invited a group of lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, to come to the White House. The Democrats chose not to show. Did the White House underestimate the Democratic unity on this, particularly in regards to the shutdown?
I think to some degree, yes, Rena. I mean, they're trying to divide and conquer, which, of course, is what you do in politics. And the fact that Democrats said, no, I'm not going to come to the White House, certainly in Trump districts, that could hurt them because that's going to lead to local headlines of Democrats in swing districts that are going to be targeted in 2020. But it does show the unity on the Democratic side. And that's the thing. I mean, you look at the big picture here, Rena, is that the president last week, he gave a speech. He went to the border. It didn't change things. The polls show that the public, by and large, blames Trump by anywhere from 15 to 20 points. That's a big margin. So President Trump needs a game changer, and certainly his speech last week was not.
How do you get a game changer at this point, Bob?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I think some Republicans have floated the funding levels on the sequester certainly have to be decided. Maybe you make this a bigger deal. Maybe you bring in Dreamers. Maybe you bring in minimum wage, you know, something more government spending, which Democrats like. That's the only way I think you can change the dynamic. But the parameters and the way we're looking at it now for this kind of small deal, it's not happening. The politics of the wall are too poisonous for the Democratic Party, especially after winning back the House. So I think he's got to go big. Otherwise, there will not going to be a small deal anytime soon.
I want to ask you, I'm sure you were watching the William Barr hearings on the Judiciary Committee was holding yesterday. What's your sense about what you heard from him yesterday? The sense a lot of people are saying is, of course, he'll pass the confirmation process, but I'm curious what stood out to you.
I think it showed that William Barr is an experienced Washington hand. In 1991, he was confirmed by the full Senate by voice vote. Now, in these volatile political times, that can never happen for Attorney General nominee. But I thought he handled questions extremely well, and I think he's actually going to pick off a couple of Democratic votes. Joe Manchin, he's certainly qualified for the position. But what stood out to me, Rena, was that he certainly distanced himself from the president, and he said that he's not going to be bullied and he's going to protect the Bob Mueller probe, even though he's been critical of it in the past with a 19-page memo he sent to Rod Rosenstein. I think he assured a lot of Democrats that he's going to be a very competent person in the position, and they may not vote for him, but I think they like the choice.
And the other big takeaway is potentially his grandson will be running to unite the country. The only person, I think, at any sort of hearing who got support from both sides of the aisle was his three-year-old grandson.
Yep.
I do want to also ask you, though, speaking of Attorney General, I want to ask you about acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker is going to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. This will happen in February. What do you think House Democrats want to hear from him?
Well, this has been a big issue for the chairman, Jerry Nadler, and he wants to get, the impetus was to get answers on the Mueller probe, which certainly front and center. And I think that this is going to be less contentious than we thought. It's certainly not going to be a love fest by any stretch of the imagination. We also don't know where Whitaker's going to go. As you said, I think Barr is going to be confirmed rather easily. You don't need Democratic votes for that. But then what does Whitaker do? Does Whitaker replace Rod Rosenstein as a deputy attorney general? Democrats are not fond of Whitaker and would want him out. Now, Bill Barr said in his testimony that the president promised him he could pick his own number two, and I would imagine it's not going to be Whitaker. But certainly in this interim, they want to know what he's done with the Mueller probe, any interactions, any interference, and he is going to testify. So it's going to be fascinating to see what he says, because we really haven't heard from him publicly, and how he deals with this confrontation is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think we're all looking forward to seeing exactly what he has to say. Bob Cusack, grateful you can join us. Bob, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rena.
You bet.